According to historian Charles E. Brown, the alleged werewolf earned his living as an itinerant dance instructor. Okay, this is hysterical. I'm sorry. The alleged werewolf earned his living as an itinerant dance instructor. So by the daytime, he was a dancer, and by the nighttime, he was a werewolf. There has to be a movie made by this story. I'm sorry, but it has to be. Well, please make it not horror, but a comedy movie. I'm sorry, but it has to be that way. His name was Gross, which means big in German. Sometime before 1848, Herr Gross had come to settle in Springfield Corners, a few miles northwest of Madison, and was boarding with a farmer who lived on Sauk Road. Springfield Corners lies on a crossroads at the intersection of what is now a State Highway 12 and County Road P, between a couple of small lakes and the Waunakee Marsh. At the time of Herr Gross, the little community believed that a werewolf lurked on its fringes. A housewife saw a wolf-like creature, and the sight made her start in surprise and twist her ankle. She then heard the beast laugh at her. Maybe this was a were hyena, right? Not a werewolf. Maybe it was a were hyena because it was laughing at her, right? The deaths of 6 children in one family from that town were also blamed on the werewolf, although the deaths were from illness. Everyone suspected that Gross was a werewolf, that he had cursed the children with his devilish powers. I don't know about that. I never heard about a werewolf having magical powers. But I don't know. One day, a wealthy farmer made a trip to Madison to buy some horses with a stash of gold coins. He did not come back because he went drinking. Duh. He was later found robbed and murdered. Everyone again suspected Gross. Man, once you're a black sheep in the family, you're always black sheep. So everyone suspected Gross, but because they thought he was a werewolf, he was not openly accused for fear of what he might do in retribution. Gross lived out the rest of his years in Springfield Corners under a cloud of suspicion. There was also at least one wandering near feral person in Wisconsin. Dubbed the wildman of Lagrange, he probably could have been burned on the spot had he lived in 16th century Europe. Well, if he was really a wolfman that was hurting people, then, can't blame people. Look back in the 19th century annals of the newspaper and you will inevitably find stories of local wildmen. Sometimes the tales are invested with superstitions that people held about single, reclusive, quote-unquote hermits. Often, especially in stories dating back to the 1800s, the tales may be quite sensationalized and hint of appearances and behavior that now remind us of Bigfoot and Dogman. In W Files, so this is not X Files, but W Files, okay. True reports of Wisconsin's unexplained phenomena. J. Rath tells of the 1899 Chippewa County capture of one wild man who had lost nearly all resemblance to a human being. And of another reported in 1900 to be scaring the beach-habbers out of people around in far western Wisconsin with his long black beard. Man, at one point I had black beard. Doesn't mean I was scary. I don't know. I hope not. I'll start shaving often. I promise, if that will save me from trouble. So with his long black beard, wild screams, and his habit of toting a Gransberg hatchet everywhere. Some have suggested that modern creature sightings may also be misidentification of very rustic humans. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the movie or movies type of like Hills Have Eyes or The Wrong Turn, where you see these wild men in the rural places of America, right? Like they're worse than cavemen. But in Depression era America, the subjects of these reports were usually men who were homeless, unemployed, or afflicted with mental disorders. And this is sad. This is very believable. This happens. Some were merely unassimilated immigrants. The one captured in downtown Whitewater in February 1929 may have been all of the above. The Whitewater Register article published February 14 under the headline Lagrange Wildman Captured by Thayer said, periodically for several years, a mysterious stranger has made his home in the rough country north of Lagrange. He was a wild-looking individual, short, stocky, bewhiskered, unkempt, furtive, and with no visible means of support. He lived in straw stacks and field barns, and occasionally came to the laudable store. I don't know, I can't pronounce this, for food. Anyway, he came to a store for supplies. Naturally, his wild appearance when he was seeing gay women and children affright. This actually and honestly makes me sad, because this could have been very misunderstood for just someone who was like we just read. He was a stranger, he was a foreigner, maybe he didn't know the language, he didn't have family, he was just fighting to survive. And because he was not groomed well, he was a homeless, he was outside, he looked weird to people and they were scared of him. But this doesn't sound like someone who wanted to hurt people. Yeah, Sean, I'm sorry I didn't see your comment when I made about the catfish. He said they were huge, capitalized huge catfish, who supposedly swallowed the werewolf from the previous story. Yeah, maybe. Lagrange has been the location of many sightings of both Bigfoot and manwolf from the 1960s on. It lies on the edge of the Cattle Moraine State Forest, and its corner store still survives to serve the many hikers and bikers who come to explore Cattle Moraine's recreational trails. I can say that I know the community well since I happen to live quite near it. And in 1929, Lagrange had its own constable, and yes, had its own constable, Bill Thayer, who decided the wild man had become a scary nuisance that shouldn't be hunted down. I don't like that. That doesn't seem fair. It just seems as a abandoned, ungroomed, homeless person who was from another country. The intrepid Thayer began to lie in wait of the Lagrange store. One day he somehow nabbed the scruffy fellow and took him to the county jail in Elkhorn, which had a steady stream of vagrants in 1929. The register noted that the bedraggled man was covered in quote-unquote varied artifacts to keep from freezing to death, and then speculated that he might be Russian. All he needed was a blanket and a soup, not to be tortured or imprisoned. I found no further mention of that wild man, but it did occur to me that it was only 7 years later and about 20 miles away that Mark Shackelman saw the enigmatic beast atop the burial mound of St. Coletta Institute just outside Jefferson. Might Shackelman have actually seen the hairy wild man in the darkness and misidentified him? I would say possibly. I'm not saying this was the same person, but it could be. I mean, this is well known. Just forget about religion or paranormal stuff. We know this from psychology, that we are afraid of the things that we don't know. So if something is unknown to us, we tend to be, I'm not saying like you're trembling in fear, but you're staying away from that because it's unknown. You want to protect yourself. So in that way, people are overprotected sometimes because we don't know something. So according to the author, Linda S. Godfrey, wrote this book that would explain the creature's ability to utter the word of Gadara. Gadara, I don't know what is this. So let's find out. The fact that the wild man wore assorted articles of clothing would have been very apparent to Shackelman. However, And I doubt the little fellow would have looked like a tall, fur-covered monster with fangs and claws. Especially because this dude, this supposedly Russian, was short, as we read. So I don't think this was the same like shape-shifting person at all. Doesn't look psychologically, physically, spiritually, doesn't look at all. So according to the author again, she doesn't think it was the same person, full covered monster with fangs and claws, even in the dramatic illumination given by the flashlight at night. I also tried looking up phonetic variations of Gadara in Russian dictionary, just in case the word meant something like brother, can you spare a dime? But with no results. I must conclude, then, that the wild man of Lagrange probably cannot be blamed for Saint Coletta incident, but I think it's good to remember such unkempt specimens of humanity were out there and still maybe. Okay, that was my last story for tonight, but I just have to give the last comment. This is sad. There is nothing supernatural in this story except a homeless person who wanted to be alone, who just needed help and love of his fellow neighbors. And again, forget about religion or supernatural stories. He was, because of his look, right? There was no one to take care of him. He looks so different than us, and people have turned him into a monster. And a so-called self-proclaimed hero back in that day wanted to capture him, and he did put him to jail just because he looked different, and so that he would appease to the people of his town and his age. And that's sad. That's sad. And I hope we can learn something from this last story. That is not always. Well, I hope we'll learn from all these stories tonight that not everything we see that is mysterious, um, that it must be demonic. It could be a result of psychological um, condition of someone. They may not be involved in occultic or anything supernatural. They could be just people who need the therapy and, to be helped and held in a mental institution, at least for the time period until they're helped. So, not everything that is weird, not everything that is mysterious is demonic. I also hope that we see in this story, like this poor foreigner. I hope, because I was a foreigner once in the States, so I hope we also learn that not every foreigner who's asking for help, that we don't always see them as, you know, as evil or, you know, maybe you don't belong here just because they're different than us. So there is some biblical message to this, especially this last point, to love your neighbor. That doesn't mean you can always take them home or buy them food or whatever, but you don't have to hate them. You don't have to kick them out. You don't have to call police if you see someone who is coming from a different country and just asking for help. We can be kind, and sometimes being kind to someone is not just talking to them or hugging them or helping them and praying for them. Sometimes it's also smiling and leaving them alone instead of bothering them.